Tony Bellew is a fighter who has probably been my biggest source of pain since starting this channel. Time and time again, he's made me look like I know absolutely nothing about boxing. Time and time again, he's upset the apple cart and got the win when I didn't expect him to. Now, I'm not saying last night's win came as a surprise against Flores. I think Bellew, as I said in my video before, was certainly a favourite to win the fight. But I thought it would be a much more testing fight for him than it was. And yet again, Tony Bellew goes marching on. And he's a fighter who I must say I've picked against consistently, and I will continue to pick against consistently if he fights at a medium to high level. Because he's a fighter I just cannot work out. I have never seen a fighter as bad as Tony Bellew having success like this. He's got to be one of British boxing's biggest overachievers. If you contrast what he does right in the ring, what he does wrong in the ring with his performances. And one person who believes Tony Bellew is very, very, very good is Tony Bellew, who genuinely seems to think he is the second coming of Evander Holyfield. Not only in the sense that he's a light heavyweight, going to cruiserweight, winning the cruiserweight belts, but don't rule out Tony Bellew believing that he can be unified heavyweight champion one day. Certainly it wouldn't surprise me if he decides his career needs to develop in that direction, you know, with a fight with David Haye, for example. But I'm rambling a bit here. Let's talk about the fight itself. Flores comes out and wins the first round on my card. You know, Flores is landing with the jab. We know Tony Bellew has never been able to block a jab. That didn't change in this fight. Flores was able to get that jab established, and for me, in a sort of nitty-gritty first round where not too much happened, Flores stole it. If you want to give the round to Bellew, I don't really care. It was a close round. I'm not totally passionate about the fact that Flores won the first round, but for me, he did enough to win the first round. Second round, Bellew comes out, and the fight is continuing in that general direction. It's maybe starting to heat up a little bit, but it looks to me like a very close fight, a very competitive matchup. At that point, Tony Bellew hits Flores with a blatant low blow. Now, I spoke about low blows in boxing on a video last week, 10 things I hate about boxing, or 10 things I'd like to change about boxing. And I said it really annoyed me that boxers can't punch to the body because the belts are so high. This wasn't a low blow of that nature. This wasn't a low blow which was actually a body punch, but has been ruled a low blow because of the positioning of the opponent's shots. To my eye, this appeared to be a large low blow, and he caught Flores hard with that. Now the referee, Ian John Lewis, is an old friend of the channel, as long-time viewers may know. Ian John Lewis is a guy I've got a lot of time for. I genuinely believe he's one of the fairest men in the sport. So I'm not saying that Ian John Lewis was involved in any home cooking here, but Ian John Lewis missed what I consider to be a blatant low blow. And there's an element of human error in refereeing. There's always going to be. So I'm not trying to be critical of Ian John, especially if you're watching Ian. But Tony Bellew was very fortunate. He hit his opponent with a very, very blatant low blow. And Flores, to be honest, was very poor in the way he complained to the referee. He left himself completely open to Tony Bellew's shots. And, you know, he was so busy complaining and whinging and moaning to the referee that Bellew was able to score the first knockdown of the fight during that barrage. Now, a lot of Bellew's knockdowns in this fight, I've watched it back. At least some of them, I'm unclear whether clean punches landed. And I think Johnny Nelson said, I think I'm right in saying it was Johnny Nelson on the Sky footage, that he thought Flores had actually taken a dive for one of the knockdowns in order to try and highlight the fact that Tony Bellew had low blowed him. But whatever happened, from that point onwards, Flores' will seemed to have disappeared slightly. You know, Bellew was kind of able to push the pace, overwhelm him, and hurt him, drop him on multiple times. I'm not saying Flores would have won the fight. It kind of looked like he was broken at that point. It may have been that, like Tony Bellew was saying, he made the weight wrongly and he was too heavy for the weight, and as a result, his performance was slightly sapped. But it just looked from that point of the low blow that the fight was only going in one direction, if I'm completely honest, and that was in Tony Bellew's direction. I personally did feel Flores could have made the count when he was stopped. But yeah, he'd taken a few big punches at that point, so maybe I'm being harsh. But to me, it didn't look like a man who was unconscious or a man who was unable to get up. It looked to me like a man who felt the fight was slipping away and decided not to get up. So Tony Bellew wins by third round stoppage. That is a very impressive thing. You know, I thought this fight would go late. I thought this fight would be competitive. Nobody stopped BJ Flores before, and Tony Bellew's come out and he stopped him in 3 rounds. It's very, very, very impressive on paper. For me, watching the performance, it was not an impressive performance from Bellew. All of the flaws that I see in Bellew's game were on evidence in the most obvious manner. The most obvious manner. When BJ Flores was throwing the jab, it was landing. David Haye's picked up on this as well. If you watch any David Haye interviews, he's saying he's going to knock Tony Bellew out with a jab. Every time BJ Flores throwed the jab, it was effective. He was catching Bellew with it. Bellew was inaccurate. He's so in love with his own power, Bellew. I've never heard a fighter so gassed up about his own power. He was standing there swinging like a baseball player, and completely abandoning his structure, completely abandoning his defensive construct, completely abandoning technique, really. You know, just out and out swinging. And we saw Flores land on him and catch him and counter him. Bellew was very open for that. I watched a video that Ultratech Sports did last night. Shout out to him, great video. And he was saying he could hear Carl Frost, who's Bellew's mate, commenting, really, really concerned about how Bellew was just chasing after Flores, looking for the stoppage, you know, with no defence and just swinging wildly. And that really was what it was like. For me, the performance from Tony Bellew, despite it being another victorious performance that reads excellently on paper, showed complete defensive ineptitude. It showed you know, a lack of thinking inside the ring. And Bellew he's on quite some streak. You know, he is on quite some streak with his wins. But I just get the feeling that he is so in love with his own power and so in love with his own hype that he genuinely believes he can beat David Haye. And I think that is potentially where the Tony Bellew streak ends. So if you haven't seen it, after the fight, Tony Bellew partakes in a relatively enjoyable WWE style call out. He jumps out the ring, leaves the ring to confront David Haye, lots of security, and then he gets on the microphone and does a sort of 2-minute speech as to how David Haye is conning the public, how David Haye has, you know, stolen money off the public with those opponents he's fighting, and how in 10-ounce gloves David Haye would not be able to live with the power of Tony Bellew. You know, it was very, very funny. This fake bad blood between David Haye and Tony Bellew, honestly, where has this come from? You know, it's not like Nathan Cleverly, Tony Bellew, the first time we saw Bellew jump out of the ring. Where is this bad blood come from? You know, I can't really see any reason that that Tony Bellew has taken a particular dislike to Haye. He seems to be marketing himself as like a defender of the public and a defender of the boxing fan. And obviously, with David Haye, you know, having these questionable fights, Tony Bellew is saying he's conning the public. Having said that, David Haye did have his last fight on free TV, so he might be conning the public, but not that much, because nobody's having to pay for it, like we are having to pay for Sky. But anyway, I digress. So, Tony Bellew gets on the microphone and tears into David Haye. And I'm thinking, where has this bad blood come from? And then I remember, of course I know where it's come from. It's come from Eddie Hearn. Because what's going to happen now is Tony Bellew is going to have to face his mandatory challenger, which is Briedis. And for those of you who didn't see it, Briedis fought Simon Vallily on the undercard and looked very, very good. And this is the same Briedis who we've seen knocking out heavyweights. We saw him knock out Manuel chart. I think he's 21-0 now. He looks like a real hard nut. And most people consider him the number 2 cruiserweight, I think, after Alexander is. So, Eddie Hearn, I presume, has had a word with Tony Bellew and said, Tony, your next fight is against Briedis. For this fight, you are going to get small money, and it's not going to be on pay-per-view, and it's not going to sell many tickets. So you're going to get a small money, small celebrity out of it, and let's be honest, even if we're being charitable to Bellew, that is a very tough fight. Yeah, for me, based on the performance Briedis showed, I think Briedis would knock Tony Bellew out quite easily. But, you know, even if we're Tony Bellew fans, let's say it's a competitive fight for very small money. And I think Eddie Hearn is thinking, if we're going to risk a horrible loss for Tony Bellew, let's risk that loss against David Haye. It's a pay-per-view fight. It's going to sell out the O2. It's going to generate huge public interest in Bellew's career. And if Bellew does take a loss, you can always say it was against David Haye, one of the hardest punchers of a generation. It was against David Haye. David Haye's a heavyweight. Bellew's not a heavyweight. And you can kind of rebrand and restructure with £1 million in the bank and with a huge boost in profile and celebrity for Tony Bellew. So that's where this fake bad blood has come from. Let's have it right. And I don't see the fight as being... I see the fight as being likely, actually. David Haye, because of his ludicrously high rankings with certain governing bodies, and because of the recent situation with Tyson Fury, etc., there is a small chance David Haye may be able to get some sort of heavyweight title fight. And I think if he's able to get that, even if it's for a regular or an interim title, David Haye may be inclined to do so. David Haye has always been someone who's wanted titles. He's always been someone, in my opinion, who has enjoyed the celebrity of being heavyweight champion of the world. And I think he would be fully motivated to take a title fight if one was available. But if one isn't available, then this Bellew fight has to be appealing. I mean, we've seen Haye's recent modus operandi is fighting guys who have very little chance against him and destroying them. And in Tony Bellew, you've got a guy who is arguably even less dangerous for my money. Stylistically, that fight is the perfect matchup for Haye. And Haye said afterwards, I think it was in an interview with IFL TV, he said, I'm faster than Tony Bellew. I've got better punch variety than Tony Bellew. I've got a better chin than Tony Bellew. I hit a hell of a lot harder than Tony Bellew. And he's right. He's right in every sense. David Haye, especially under Shane McGuigan, you look at Shane McGuigan, he seems to be very good at getting fighters to use the jab. You know, David Haye I've always viewed as this kind of outside, ambush, explosive fighter who's been small for the division and has to sort of float around on the outside and then ambush in. With Tony Bellew, it would be very different. Haye would be the bigger man in there. Haye would be the stronger man in there. Haye would be the more athletic man, the bigger puncher. Haye would have the better jab. I could see David Haye just jabbing Tony Bellew's head off, frankly, softening him up and then landing that big haymaker. And Tony Bellew, you know, he's got a lot of heart. The guy gets up and fights time and time again. But let's have it right. This is a guy who was dropped by Oval Mackenzie at 175. This is a guy who was dropped by, what's his name? Adonis Stevenson, who is a small 175 guy. This is a guy who was dropped by Lunga Makabu, who's a small cruiserweight. He's now going up against an elite punching heavyweight in David Haye. He's now going up against David Haye. David Haye, he's got his detractors, and rightly so. People question what he's done at heavyweight, and again, rightly so. But in terms of talent, David Haye is a world-class talent. And while we talk about Tony Bellew being one of Britain's biggest boxing overachievers, the deficiencies in Bellew's game do not exist in David Haye's game. David Haye, people can question his stamina, people can question his character, people can question his heart, but David Haye, technically, is a level above. And for me, I think he destroys Bellew. Like, literally destroys him. I think it would be... I could see it being a one-round job. I think Bellew is so open and he's so in the mentality of being a warrior that I could see Bellew planting his feet, thinking he's going to take David Haye out and And Bellew's not the quickest guy in the ring either. I could just see David Haye opening him up with the jab, jabbing, busting him up behind the jab. I could see Tony Bellew like thinking, right, this isn't working. I'm going to have to sow my heart and take him out. Throwing a slow right hand. I could just see Haye slipping it and coming over the top with like that big right hand, straight haymaker, maybe a counter left hook. And I could see Tony Bellew just destroyed by it. I know Bellew was weight drained down at 175, but if you're getting dropped by Mackenzie at 175, David Haye at 220 is a different level, I'm afraid. And even that aside, I just don't think Bellew's got much to trouble Haye with. Some of the guys Haye has served a ring with in the past just think that Bellew is going to be very, very comfort zone for him. I don't see it as a competitive fight at all. I think the build-up would be superb. It's a fight that I would get very into. It's a fight that I'd be very interested in. Could I see it being competitive? No. But what's funny is the Sky hype. I saw Eddie Hearn's interview and he was already saying that weight wouldn't be a factor. David Haye would come in at 16 stone, Bellew would be in the 15 stones, there'd be no weight issue. I think Eddie Hearn actually said, look, if David catches Tony, yeah, Tony might go, but if Tony catches David, 10-ounce gloves. People are forgetting. David Haye stood there and took Vladimir Klitschko's right hand to the chin and fought on. People are forgetting David Haye went 12 rounds with Nikolai Valuev, who was, 20 plus stone. I'm not suddenly becoming a David Haye fanboy. I'm not going to say David Haye's got the best chin in heavyweight boxing history. I'm not going to say David Haye has the perfect game. But let's not get confused here. Let's not buy into the hype. If Tony Bellew lands on David Haye, there is no certainty whatsoever that knocks out David Haye. I don't believe that for 1 second, actually. Tony Bellew does have the potential to hurt any man. He's big enough. He clearly carries power, as he says. But it is not as simple as the first one who lands wins this fight. You look at some punches and you think of Joshua Haye, and maybe that's one where you could say the first one who lands a big punch wins the fight. With Bellew Haye, it's a slightly different dynamic. For me, it's if Haye can land one, it's over. If Bellew can land 100, maybe it's over. But yeah. So that's my thoughts on that fight. Part of me, the sort of slightly juvenile part, did enjoy the antics after the fight. It was slightly ludicrous when Bellew was calling him SpongeBob SquarePants. Slightly embarrassing at that point. But I did enjoy the hype. I did enjoy it. And if you're wondering where the fake hype has come from and the fake bad blood, it's because Eddie Hearn is thinking to himself, if we've got to take a loss here, let's do it against David Haye, not Briedis. That's my take on it. Briedis fought Vallily on the undercard, and look, Vallily's 9-0. He came out, maybe he nicked the first round, but Vallily is, maybe he's a talent, maybe Vallily can go somewhere in boxing. But this was just far too soon for him. And Briedis got caught. Vallily caught Briedis a few times. Briedis didn't look perfect in there, but Briedis was just able to grind him down. He's obviously naturally very, very heavy-handed, Briedis. He didn't look the biggest cruiserweight to me. Vallily looked a lot bigger than him in there. And that makes it even more impressive that he's stopping guys like Manuel Char at heavyweight, because he's not the biggest cruiserweight, as I say, and he's knocking out heavyweight. So Briedis is very heavy-handed, and he's aggressive. And, that Bellew fight, Bellew-Briedis would actually make for a very entertaining fight. I think stylistically that'd be a great fight. I think it could be a real interesting clash. But I think it would only be interesting to the likes of you and I. I don't think it's going to be interesting to the average Sky Sports boxing fan. It's certainly not a pay-per-view fight. It's certainly not a major ticket seller. So, so I think Bellew's actually in a very difficult position, because Hearn alluded to the fact that mandatory could be called in May. Now, if he can't get the David Haye fight in January, February, and this is probably why he's pushing so hard for it, because he knows he needs to move quickly. If he can't get that fight in January, February, he's going to have to fight Briedis, or he's going to have to vacate his title. And I don't see him vacating his title unless there's a massive fight on the horizon, like a David Haye. You know, so you never know. You never know how these things develop. But I detect they probably will not want to fight Briedis. The risk-reward just doesn't add up. You know, the Hearns are accountants, let's not forget that. Risk-reward is their bread and butter. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on that fight. Credit to Tony Bellew. Once again, he's proved me wrong. Once again, he's overperformed against my expectations. Once again, he's overachieved. Bellew is actually a very likeable guy. You know, he's so over the top, I find it very entertaining. But my beef with Bellew is just a complete lack of fundamentals at a world-class level. And I can't help but thinking he's going to get horribly found out at some point, and he's bitten off more than he can chew with David Haye. But let's see if the fight happens. I think it's a very strong possibility it happens, but David Haye's a shrewd, calculated guy. He knows that Bellew needs this fight, because I think he knows that Bellew doesn't want to fight Briedis for little money. So he's going to be asking for a lot in negotiations. Haye's probably got other options, whereas I don't think Bellew's got other options. I think Bellew's other tangible option is Briedis. So yeah, David Haye maybe has world title aspirations, which Bellew doesn't bring to the table at heavyweight. Having said that, for David Haye, it's a return to pay-per-view. It's £1 or £2 million for what I would perceive to be very easy work. And getting him out on Sky Sports pay-per-view, if he wins that fight in devastating fashion, you know, that raises his profile to such an extent. Hey Joshua for the summer, very realistic off the back of a fight of that nature for me. So it's real interesting. It's real interesting, and we'll have to see what happens. Leave your comments below. Leave your comments on Bellew's performance. Leave your comments on the bad blood afterwards. Do you agree with me that it's fake? Do you agree with me that this has been engineered to avoid the Briedis fight? Leave your comments on what David Haye will do, and leave your comments on what you think would happen if Haye actually fought Bellew. Let's move on quickly to Luke Campbell versus Derry Matthews. Yeah, Derry Matthews, experienced guy, he's had 50 odd fights, warrior of the game, happy to go to rival promoters' shows and fight their fighters. You know, a lot to like about Derry Matthews. I'm not someone who writes a fighter off just because they've had a loss on their record or 2 losses on their record. You know, there's countless examples of why it's wrong to do that. Johnny Nelson, Owen McKenzie, Bernard Hopkins, you know. But the fact of the matter is, Derry Matthews has lost multiple times. He's lost multiple times. He's been stopped on multiple occasions. He's lost to... Yeah, he was getting outboxed by Tommy Coyle. Let's put it that way. Derry Matthews is a likeable operator. For me, he's sub-world-class level. So I wasn't surprised at all that Luke Campbell won. Luke Campbell won in more convincing fashion than I thought he would. I know Terry Flanagan doesn't seem to carry a huge amount of power, but Matthews obviously went the distance with Terry Flanagan relatively recently. And it is impressive, putting the 2 performances side by side, that Luke Campbell was able to get him out of there in 4 rounds. Luke Campbell is a very big guy, and his performances are inconsistent. We see very good performances from Luke Campbell and very average performances from Luke Campbell. And as I've said time and time again on this channel, my personal take on that is it relates to how he makes the weight. Campbell's had a lot of problems outside the ring. You know, he's had health issues with his family, changing trainers. There's been real issues there. And for me, Campbell is very big at lightweight. For me, he's got a frame of a 140 fighter at least, potentially a 147 fighter in the future. He's tall. He's tall and rangy. He's got big shoulders. You know, he's got a big ass frame. So don't be surprised at all to see him move up. And I think he has to go through a lot of hell to make 135. I've seen him at weigh-ins, as I've said, and you know, it's not been the prettiest sight. So I think that's why his performances are so inconsistent. But last night he was on. You know, his movement around the ring was good. He didn't allow Derry Matthews to cut down the ring and to close up on him on the pocket like Mendy was able to when Mendy scored the victory over Luke Campbell. He was pot-shotting well. He was leading well. The bodywork was obviously fantastic. And the power is there with Luke Campbell. I mean, Luke Campbell isn't like a mega puncher, you know. He doesn't carry Tony Bellew-esque power, let alone David Haye power. But he's a hurtful puncher, and he carries enough to get you out of there and to hurt you and to grind you down, like he did with Derry Matthews, actually. You know, yet again, another bit, and these things happen. There is human error in boxing, but I said there was a bit of luck for the home matchroom fighter in the main event. There was also a little bit of luck for the matchroom fighter in this event, when a knockdown was ruled against Derry Matthews, where a punch didn't even land from Luke Campbell. But I guess there's an element of human error with refereeing, so I shouldn't be too sceptical. But, you know, Derry Matthews' feet got tangled up. Campbell throws a punch. The punch misses. Right. Campbell's sort of bicep scratches Matthews' nose, and Matthews goes down, and it's ruled a knockdown. It's clearly not a knockdown, but, you know, but Campbell comes on well. He's evasive in the ring. He finishes relatively well. He catches Matthews with a big body shot that drops Matthews. Matthews has a lot of heart, gets back up, rallies, looks for the stoppage, goes swinging, goes out on his shield. Campbell catches him sweet to the body again and stops him. Derry Matthews hitting at retirement after it. Luke Campbell, he's talking, should he fight for the British, should he go world level? Campbell's not a baby. I don't know how old he is now, but he's older than he looks, I know that. I think he's nearer to 30 than 20. Having said that, there isn't mega rush to get him a world title fight. I think Eddie Hearn is rolling the dice with him a bit more, because he maybe isn't the ticket seller that Hearn was expecting him to be. He isn't quite the personality that Hearn was expecting him to be. And I think Eddie Hearn is kind of inclined to position him into big fights in order to generate interest, rather than just moving him along slowly and stepping him up in levels. And I think that's why we've seen Campbell in more testing fights. So it'd be interesting to see where he goes next. You know, there's a live domestic division there. Flanagan, Troller obviously coming off a loss. There's big fights out there, and it'll be interesting to see where he turns up. But it was an impressive performance from Luke Campbell. I do think his future is at 140. But if he can box like that at 135, he does have the potential to be a world champion as far as I'm concerned. It was a real strong performance from him. Let me know your thoughts on Campbell. Let me know your thoughts on Bellew, Haye, the hype, matchroom, whatever. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. I'm going to do a video later today on some of the other boxing that took place this weekend. Notably, Erkan Tepe, the drug cheat, losing against Christian Hamer. I'm going to talk Adrian Grinat a little bit as well. So I'm going to get that video up later today. If you want to check that out, or if you're new to the channel, please press subscribe so you can view my other stuff. Many thanks for watching, guys. As always, I appreciate it.